my Juicy co-creators, Lilou here on the Juicy Living Tour. I'm actually in London, in England, with those crazy British folks that joke all the time. Today I'm with Phil, though. Soon Dr. Phil, the British Dr. Phil. No, A House author. Congratulations, that's a big deal here.
Yes, cool, yeah. I'm on my third book for them.
And the one we're specifically going to talk about, but I mean, actually most of them, but it's called the life that you love right now, because it's all about the present moment, huh?
Yeah, that's right, yeah, absolutely.
So you're an NLP practitioner, and you created something called the lightening process that we're going to talk more about. We're going to start with stress and anxiety and panic attacks, because this place in London reminds me of these panic attacks I had after losing my job, finding myself without any money years ago. And I remember how dense it was and how real it felt. What do you say to some of your patients that come to you? Because I know you get quite a lot of them here in London in your office. What do you tell them when you hear such a dense emotion?
Well, the first thing to do actually is completely the opposite to what you would imagine, which is to shift them out of it as quickly as possible, to not spend a lot of time talking about it, but instead find ways to change it. We talked earlier about a pencil, that if you put a pencil across your mouth and bite on it very gently, that naturally puts your face into a smile. And doing that allows you to find it more difficult to connect up with stress and fear and worry. So we just get them to actually laugh and smile and think differently, because what you've got to do is not stabilize the state. Very often what people will do, I remember going to school one morning to drop my kids off, and I noticed one woman had suddenly gone into a panic attack, and all the people rushed to her and went, "Are you okay? Are you okay? Are you all right? Oh my God, you look dreadful. You're going pale. You need to lie down." And all they were doing, unfortunately, in their kindness, was generating more anxiety and stress, drawing attention to the woman, crowding round her, making her really worried. And instead, I came in and just started talking about something completely different. And she was completely focused on what I was saying. It's like, this is what I need to think about. With panic attacks, with stress, yeah, we need to identify what's going on and change that. But actually, worrying about it and overanalyzing it just takes you further into it, takes you further into the neurology. There's this thing called neuroplasticity, which is the idea that the more you use your brain, the better it works at doing that. The brain kind of goes, well, if you're going to do this a lot, I'll make this easier. So what you have is you have a pathway that comes along and it joins to another nerve pathway, what's called a synapse. And it could go one of two ways. Maybe it could go up to stress or it could go down to happiness. If you keep on going into stress, then what happens is those nerves actually move together. And the nerve pathway that goes to happiness gets further away, and it becomes more difficult to jump that gap. Interesting, if you all know, this is where neurotransmitters live. You've heard of neurotransmitters, yeah? Neurotransmitters carry the signal across. But if the nerves are very close, then it makes it easier to travel. So neuroplasticity is how the brain actually changes physically its architecture very, very quickly as we're using it. So if you're stressed and you start to talk more about stress and you take antidepressants or anti-anxiety tablets and you go to a stress clinic, all those things actually will trigger more and more stress. In fact, there was an interesting study. A guy called Thomas Weiss did one of those scans where they see the activity of the brain, which bits are being lit up. And he found that if you say words like pain or burning or intense, so words related to pain, then you'll see a triggering of the pain processing centers of the brain. Whereas if you say words like avocado and banana, which have no relationship to pain particularly, you don't see an activation of the pain sensation areas. What's interesting is if you have pain, then what you do is you talk about pain a lot. I've got this pain. You tell your friends about it. You go see the doctors. They say, how is your pain? You go to the pain clinic. Your world is full of pain. And the same with stress. If you talk about stress, you'll actually activate the neurology of stress. The words that we use, whether they're quietly in our head or the words outside, will encourage stress. So the more you talk about stress, as I've just done for the last 5 minutes, the more stress you have. So instead, we need to talk about what's the opposite of stress.
Happiness.
Yeah, happiness and calm.
Relax, peace.
That's fantastic. If you ask most people, what do you want instead of stress, what they usually answer is not stress.
Yeah, relief.
Yeah, and unfortunately, as soon as you say not stress, all you're thinking about is stress.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, for example, if I say to you, Do not think about Einstein riding a purple elephant whilst having a small octopus in his hand eating a little yellow ice cream. What do you think about? You think about all those things. And that's the way the brain functions. If you ask the brain to not do something, to not think about pain or stress, it just does it automatically. And if you keep on doing that, you rewire your brain in not a very clever way.
How long does it take?
To rewire the brain, the studies say within a few hours. The rat studies they've done, and rat brains are considered to be quite similar to human brains, which is why they use rats a lot in psychological and behavioural experiments. Rats' brains can change within hours, but they reckon at least within a couple of days you'll see change.
It's repetition, I guess, for neuropathways to be created.
Well, the example I always talk about is imagine you and me are going out, right? And then one day you come home, you think about me, and oh, Phil, and you think of butterflies and fluffy puppies, yeah. And then
dolphins.
Most people do. And then you come home one day and you find me in bed with my friend Roger. You're like, how quickly does it take for the reminiscence of my name from butterflies and fluffy puppies to go, that Phil, I would never want to see him again. It's instantaneous. So we know change occurs in a millisecond. We know that about the brain. What we've got to look at, though, is how do we make that change occur? So we know change is potential to happen in a millisecond, because we've all had those experiences where we used to like someone and now we don't, or we didn't know someone and now we think about them all the time. We know change can happen. How do we make that change happen? Because one of the constants we see, stress is a good example, is how people struggle with change. How, although change, as we know, happens in everyone's lives, it's one of the things that people have most difficulty is, how do I change these things? What I do a lot is make change simple. And to make it simple, you have to make it fun.
But we have to accept also that change is there. I guess part of it is being okay with change, or being more relaxed, or having a different reality about it, perception.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of stress comes from change. You lose your job, as you did. You get stressed about it. Something new happens that you weren't expecting. Classic example of why we get stressed. So we often get stressed around change. But as I was talking earlier, the whole idea of stress doesn't actually exist as a thing. Stress, you can't bottle it. You can't buy it in the shop. Stress is a response we have, or as I would say, a response we do. Remember we talked about this whole idea of doing, this idea that if you're stressed about losing your job or about the world economy, something you can't really change, it's not a very useful way to think about it, because then you're stressed about something you have no influence over. You're powerless. You're a victim. And that makes you more stressed about it, because we hate having things we can't do anything about. So I've invented this word, the do, D-U, with a circumflex, which says, actually, it's better to say, I am doing stress about it. Not doing with an O, like you're doing it on purpose, but doing it unconsciously, which is what the U means. You don't mean to, but somehow you are generating stress about it. But the good news is, if you're generating stress about it, then you could not. You could stop doing it. Stop doing stress and do calmness about it, do acceptance. Because the Serenity Prayer, which again we mentioned, the Serenity Prayer is such a powerful thing. The idea that we should accept, we should have the serenity to accept the things we cannot change, the courage to change the things we can, and the wisdom to see the difference between those two. And that is where we get stuck all the time. We spend so much time going, I've lost my job, this is so annoying. Well, if you lost your job, you've lost your job. And there's no point in, getting too upset about it, because what you need to do instead is work out what you're going to do next. Find a new job, change your career, take notice of what the world's saying to you or the universe is saying to you. But staying stuck in that moment that's already actually now past, can't be unmade. One of the things I often say is, there's no problem that can't be resolved with one magic wish or a time machine. Yeah, it's true, isn't it? If we had a time machine or a magic wish, we could probably resolve most problems. But unfortunately, those things are in short supply. So we have to find different strategies for resolving the problems that we have. Yeah.
I remember it reminded me of this moment where I was in Japan and I said to somebody, "Stop stressing me," like if that person was doing that to me. And then I finally got, and I shared it on a video blog, why am I hurting myself this way? Because we hurt ourselves, huh? You get into addictions too. I know you really. You get at your office people in consultation also that have strong addictions. That's another way to hurt ourselves, isn't it? I mean, we do that. We do all those really tough things. Like, it's so mind-boggling when it's so counterproductive, and so why do we get into all those patterns? How wild and deep and destructive.
What's interesting is the why question that you just asked there is actually the least useful question. Why do we do it? Well, that's not really relevant. The question is, how do we not do that? How do we move out of it? But we do. We all do. And this is where the do, this DU, with the circumflex, really comes into play. It's saying, yeah, we do. We do get stressed. We do get annoyed in the supermarket queue when there's somebody's being slow in the checkout in front of us. We do lose our temper with our kids or with the traffic or with the weather or whatever it is. We constantly do that. But we're not doing it on purpose. So we shouldn't blame ourselves, because that's a classic thing. People go, oh, why did I do that? I'm so stupid. They add an extra level. Not only were they stressed, now they're beating themselves up about it. Well, that doesn't help. All these things move you into what we call, in the Get the Life You Love Now book, the pit. The pit is anything that isn't life enhancing. So any behaviors, any ways of thinking, any actions you take, any drugs you take that are not enhancing your life are a version of the pit. And what we often find is, if we say to people, how much you're in the pit, what percentage? They'll go, 20, maybe 30. And then we say, what percentage of the time are you having a life you love? They go, about 10. Well, then in the middle, there's a whole chunk of time which you're not having a life you love, which is by definition a version of the pit, a time when you're not doing life-enhancing things. So they may go, well, I just was a bit bored. That's not the pit. Well, it is the pit, actually. Being bored is a really good way, because what happens when people get bored? That's when they overdrink, overeat, overthink, do stupid things that they regret afterwards. I mean, how often do we find this, where people go, I wish I hadn't have done that. I wish I hadn't have said that. I wish I hadn't have got myself into that position. Because we're not getting ourselves in the right state. We're not using our neurology properly. And we shouldn't beat ourselves up about it. But what we should do is kind of go, okay, how do I do this differently next time? How do I get my brain so it helps me, moves me forwards? Because in Japan, when you're having, when you're saying that person's stressing me, we can see it makes no sense. Nobody can stress you. It's not possible. We don't have a button that people go up and go, I got you. Although it feels that way. It feels that other people trigger us. They don't. We trigger ourselves. Other people help, sure. They can say things, they can do things, but fundamentally we are the ones that choose to respond. Unconsciously, remember, it's not like we're going, I'm choosing to be stressed. It's very much an unconscious choice. But it's us. It's us doing stress. It's nobody else doing the stress to us. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And the lightning process and all that, how did you get to this place of creating, something where you have 100 different practitioners that are now applying it? I mean, this is quite phenomenal. It must be very fulfilling and rewarding for you to be this place that now other people, do it. What is it exactly? Tell us more, because I know there's books too with A House in the UK here.
So the lightning process, excuse me, lightning process is a specific training program to help people to utilize the mind-body connection. It really comes from my research into people who are stuck, particularly with health problems, some emotional, but a lot often physical health problems, and looking at how come they hadn't changed, what was missing. I also looked generally at change itself, and one of the things I looked at was I studied a number of people who were brilliant healers. So that could be they were surgeons, or one guy I studied was a Mexican shaman, who rubbed eggs over people and cracked them in glasses and told them all sorts of things about them from reading the eggs. And I was interested in, what makes these people, what makes that relationship, that therapeutic relationship powerful? What's going on there? Because I also knew other practitioners who didn't get massive change. It was like, how can we identify the concepts, the core elements of change? Because if we can get that, if we can distill them down to these things need to happen, then we could replicate that in any situation. So I did a lot of study, talking to loads of people who were phenomenally successful at making people change, talking to people who are phenomenally unsuccessful at helping people, talking to people who are phenomenally unsuccessful at changing themselves, and just trying to work out, what's going on here? What are the factors? And the lightning process is a distillation of that, is what needs to happen to be able to influence the mind-body connection. A lot of work I looked at was looking at the placebo effect.
And the nocebo?
And the nocebo effect and all that crazy stuff, which is just mind-blowing when you look at it. I think my favorite study is the Chinese study they did, where they took, in traditional Chinese culture, if you're born in a certain astrological year, so in 5 elements, one of them is metal year, the metal element year, then you are more likely to get lung disease because the metal element is related to lungs. So you're more likely to die of a lung problem. So that's what Chinese traditional Chinese medicine would tell you. And they looked at Chinese families who had gone to the States, and they divided them into two categories. Chinese families who had stayed relatively true to the traditions of Chinese medicine, and Chinese families who had become completely westernized. And then they analyzed death rates. And what they found is if you compared the average American and what they died of with a Chinese person who had become westernized, so no longer adopted the traditional Chinese philosophies of healthcare, they were equal in terms of their likelihood of having any particular illness. But you looked at traditional Chinese families who'd moved to America but stayed true to Chinese traditional values, medicine. Those born in a lung year, a metal year, were much more likely to die of lung disease, purely because of what their beliefs were. So that's a very good example of nocebo. Another great example of nocebo is the classic study where they gave people chemotherapy and compared it with a dummy pill. So the placebo had no real chemicals in it, and they found that in the chemotherapy group, as you'd expect, 90+% of people, their hair falls out, their eyelashes, their eyebrows. But in the people who took the placebo, so contained absolutely nothing but chalk, 30 to 40% of them, all their hair falls out as a result of taking nothing. And that starts to make you go, wow, that's amazing. Medicine generally thinks the placebo effect is a bit annoying. Statistically, it gets in the way, What we've looked at is going, well, this is the most exciting thing ever. What we're seeing is continual demonstration that there is an effect of the mind on the body. And in fact, medicine recognizes this because it says when we compare a new drug with a placebo, what we're saying is we know there is an effect of a placebo, and we need to make sure our drug is better than that. And what is the effect of the placebo? Well, there's nothing in it. It's purely the mind influencing the body. So they recognize every single day with every drug trial they do, the mind does affect the body. It's incredible. My question was, how do we make that more consistent? Because if only 30 to 40% of people are getting change, that's good, but it's not great. You might think that it's 30 to 40% of people are placebo responders and the other 70% just people who don't respond to placebos. But it's not that. Because in different drug trials, you'll find different people are in different groups. So it's not like, oh, you're a placebo responder, we can count on you always responding to placebos. It will depend on what colour the pill is, who gives it to you, all sorts of factors. And what I've looked at is how do we remove all those random factors? Is there a way to get that mind-body connection activated consistently, not through luck and through chance? And that's one of the things the lightning process looks at, is how do you get the mind-body connection switched on? How do you switch it on yourself? Because, of course, it's a training program where we say, these are the tools, you need to practice them, you need to actually change. And a lot of it comes down to recognition of when you're in the pit, when you're stimulating bad physiological responses, particularly the stress response or the PER, the physical emergency response, where you're responding to threats, where it could be the job or a sunburn or anything. How do you make a change, and how do you be nice to yourself and change the kind of crappy conversations that we have with ourselves that take us...
It's noticing at first. It's really noticing that we're in this kind of vicious circle.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what's fascinating in my work with addictions is there's so much overlap. What's the first thing an addict has to do if they want to get clean? Do you know the first thing they need to do?
No.
Is to recognize they've got a problem, spot.
To speak it out, yeah.
Well, to spot that this is not good for them. They go, well, what's the matter with drinking 17 bottles of vodka a day? That's normal, isn't it? Well, no, that's not normal. Oh, okay. Once you've got recognition that there's a problem, then you've got a chance to do something. If there's no recognition this is difficult or problematic, you can't do anything about it. People running around stressed will often say, this is normal to be stressed. I mean, quite often people will say to me, anxiety is good. It motivates me. For interviews, that's a common thing people will say. Not being stressed before an interview would be not motivating. Like, no, you're confusing stress with motivation. Those are two very different things. What you need to do is be motivated before an interview, or confident. You don't need to be stressed. In fact, there's an interesting question, which is stress ever useful? Is it ever the best choice? I mean, you've been stressed a few times in your life. Was that the best choice?
I've seen talking about it, for me, the stressful event, like a lot of people actually speaking in front of others, and that stresses me. But I felt that sometimes when I'm not stressed before, I don't have the same emotion, or I'm not really as present as if there was stress before.
So what you want is to be present, not to be stressed.
Right.
Ideally, what you'd like to be is calm, confident, and present, Not people confuse stress as a route to getting present. In fact, you can be present in a million different ways, and stress takes you away from being present. You know, we can be up, we can be there, but stress is just an option. And that's the thing. Possibly the only time stress is useful is when we are chased by a tiger. That is what it's designed for. It's designed to produce a physiological response that makes us faster and stronger temporarily. But as we discussed earlier, it suppresses your immune system, suppresses your ability to think well, changes your blood physiology, your sugar levels, all sorts of things are completely out of whack when you're stressed, which is fine for the 5 to 10 seconds that a tiger is chasing you, but after then it starts to actually become a problem for you. So stress generally is not to be recommended.
I love that term, out of whack. I think I love it. I don't know why. I think it's totally brilliant. I think all of us are a little bit, have this bit grande folie, you know? There's a bit craziness, but it's good to have this little craziness. I know we're going a little bit off track here, but I love it. I love how different all human beings are, and I'm just recognizing this here. Sorry, my beautiful co-creators. This is one of those. So where were we? Yeah. So stress can be useful, and it's useful, but mainly the present moment. Only can be useful stress if there's a tiger. There's no tiger here.
That's possibly a good rule for life. You know, if you're stressed, ask yourself, is there a tiger here? Yeah. If there isn't a tiger, it's probably not the right time to be stressed. Save it for later when you really need it.
That's a good title for a book. Where's the tiger?
But mainly, no, you know, coming back to the serenity prayer, you know, we need to accept the things we can, change the things we can't, and have the wisdom to know the difference. Mostly stress is about wishing things were different than they are. Well, they are this way. So what we need to do is change how we respond to it. And as you hear me talk about stress, when I talk about being stressed, or doing stress, I talk about it in fast language, because that's what we do in our heads. We talk very fast, going, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, ah. One of the easiest ways to start to break stress, and I talk about this in the lightning process, is to shift your state into calmness. And you can hear with my voice starts to lower and slow. And just by doing that, if you're ever stressed, slowing down your internal voice, or even your voice you used to speak to other people with, will naturally change your breathing patterns and start to crack you out of that stress cycle that you've got yourself stuck into. So there's loads of things you can do. And what the lightning process does under Get the Life You Love Now book do is very clearly say, this is what you need to do. The first step is awareness, like an addict. Recognize when you're drinking, recognize when you're going into the pit, when you're going off piste, when you're going off track. Then what you need to do is you've got to make a choice. Once you realize it's you that's doing this, you're generating and not doing it on purpose, you're not to blame, but it's clearly you. Nobody else is doing the stress. Nobody else is switching on the adrenaline in your body or turning on the sympathetic nervous system. It's you. Mm-hmm. You're not doing it on purpose, but it is you. And if it's you then have a choice to switch it off. And one of the things that's been really lovely here is talking to the people who used to be addicts, who've used the version of the lightning process called the rediscovery process. Really lovely to hear them saying, after 38 years of using all sorts of drugs, I realised I'd always had a choice, and I didn't even know that until now. And now I have a choice. And one guy, amazing, he was living under a bridge. He did the version of the lightning process for addiction. He ended up in what's called a wet hostel. A wet hostel is where you can drink if you want, you can take drugs if you want. It's tolerated. And there's a dry hostel where if you go there, you can't drink or take drugs because you get kicked out. And so he was in a wet hostel, was doing this thing, the rediscovery process, got himself clean. And then because it's a wet hostel, he went back to the wet hostel and somebody said, oh, do you want a beer? And he was like, oh, I can't. It'd be rude to say not to. That'd be upsetting. So he took the beer and he went to his room and he put the beer on the table next to the bed and he slept with a can of beer and didn't touch it at all, which is absolutely amazing. You think about all the neuroplasticity that says, drink me. It's there. Nobody will know. Being able to make that switch, that choice that, I could drink that, but actually that's just going to take me down a route that I don't want to go anymore. And also how powerful it would feel to wake up in the morning and look at that can of beer and go, I was able to sleep with that beer next to me and not have it. And how that turns the virtuous cycle. We talked about the vicious cycles where we get stuck in a negative spiral. There's equally virtuous cycles where you kind of go, look what I've done. Well, I've done, which is the next step of the lightning process, which is once you made a choice to not do those crappy thoughts anymore, then we got to replace them with something more interesting, more useful. So the first step of that is to start to be nice to yourself, to bring compassion, to learn how to genuinely actually be good to yourself. I'm not religious, but I talk a lot about religion because there's so many themes that overlap. And one of the nice things that I talk about, and is in my book as well, is Jesus, where he says, out of all the commandments, there are two that I think are the most important. And he says, one is to love God above all others, and the second is to treat your neighbour as yourself. And that's generally considered to be nice to people. But if you look at the deeper meaning, it says, treat other people or your neighbour like yourself. He's probably not saying be really nasty to yourself so you can be nasty to your neighbour. It's probably not the message he's trying to give. And yet how many people are really crap to themselves? And we have a phrase in the lightning process which is, if you treated your friends like you treat yourself, would you have any? Yeah. So much of the time people are hard on themselves, they're mean to themselves, they won't give themselves any praise. And one of the things they often learn to do in both the lightning process and the Life You Love book and seminars, because there's a seminar series that goes with the Life You Love Now book, is we say, maybe it's time to learn to say, I love myself. I love who I am. Because that's such an important thing. It's so significant in terms of your longevity. It gives you an extra 10 years of life straight away, in terms of your health, in terms of your happiness. And those things are just so important.
Beautiful. This was definitely a juicy conversation. Oh my God. This so much information, and I'm very, very pleased to put this out for people wanting to discover more. Is there a last little thing that you would like to share or say that you feel is essential?
I think probably the other thing which we touched on a little bit is the word now in the title. Get the life you love now. And that's actually in capitals on the book cover. Because it says possibly the most important thing we can be. You know, loving and all that, great. Being actually present to this moment, because this is all that exists, really. The past is what happened, that's the way it was, deal with it. The future is, well, really, the future is unwritten. We have the power to design that, but not if we keep on dragging the past and our limitations about the future into it. It's unwritten until we write it, so we need to write it differently. We need to make sure we're making choices that make sure each moment, each present, if we possibly can, is our present, rather than polluted by other people's stuff or the past, to actually be here in this moment. Because to some extent that's all there is. There's a whole chapter, a whole theme about being compassionate to ourselves in the present as possibly the biggest gift you can ever give to yourself.
Beautiful. Thank you, Phil. Dr. Phil. Thank you, my beautiful co-creators, for watching and for supporting and for sharing and for all this juiciness that you spread. I hope you've enjoyed this conversation and you got lot out of it. And you can meet Phil if you want one of these days in London, or I'm sure around the world, right? You travel.
Always traveling. I'm always traveling, yeah. We're doing the Life You Love Now seminars are starting, so they're in London. They'll be across the world. Might even be on the internet if we can make that happen. So, yeah, check us out.
Yay to the internet. Big kisses, my beautiful co-creators. Bye.